One. All right. Welcome on in, folks. Hope you're doing well this Monday. It is a public holiday here in Canada, so I did have a long weekend to get over the exhaustion from traveling out to Toronto and back on Saturday for the haircut. As you can see, I got a little bit of a new haircut here from the usual. I will start by introducing the podcast. So, my name is Tai Wai, a PhD student, or a PhD candidate, I should say, and focusing on Arctic climate science during the day. But in the evening, I do this as a side hustle, if you will. I also locally run a ACE and Aero support group, and through that, it gave me the inspiration to start the ASPEC podcast. And for those of you joining us for the first time, the ASPEC podcast looks at the lived experiences of asexuality and aromanticism, focusing on aspects of intersectional identity and really trying to highlight just how diverse the ACE and Aero umbrellas are. And without further ado, I would like to introduce our guest today, XanderVs.
Yes, hello, I am XanderVs. I stream probably too many RPGs, but I guess that's just kind of what I've grown accustomed to, but I do hope to eventually branch that out, and I'm actually kind of excited that it's another RPG to actually kind of because I'm actually getting a hopefully soon a new PNG tuber model, just waiting on the artist because they've been busy. And when I get that, I'm hoping to stream Metaphor because I've really enjoyed it so much that I want to play it again.
Absolutely. Welcome on in. So glad to have you today.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Welcome on in, Duke. Good to see you. Absolutely. Many aspects of ASPEC. Absolutely. So the first question I'd like to begin with is kind of talking a little bit about ASPEC identities and the fact that in many cases, myself included, it can often be difficult to pinpoint that identity and come to really understand their one's asexual and or aromantic identity, due to the fact that it's often hard to know, if you don't have attraction, without some sort of context as to what attraction and the allosexual and the alloromantic understanding of attraction is. So how easy was it for you to come to realize your identity?
Well, I think that realizing my identity, I think I knew for a long time that I just I'm on the end of the A specs, I guess I'll say I'm quote unquote on the lucky end that was able to realize their identity sooner because I've always been sex repulse, and that is just one end of it. But I think the hardest part for me was learning what it was called, because for a long time I just felt like there was not a lot of people like me. And then in high school I found out, oh, that's called asexual. And so I think that's really when my identity really started to be like, oh, hey, I'm this, and I'm glad I found, I don't know what the proper way to put it is, but I'm glad I found this, out what this is actually called.
Absolutely. And it's so common for folks just not to have the language to describe their lived experience, as you were saying. I certainly didn't have it until I was in my early 30s, is when I really came to understand what asexuality and aromanticism really were and how I kind of associated with those labels.
Yeah, and that's, I think part of the issue was that is that not only did it take a while for, obviously other sexual identities other than just, like straight to be able to come out comfortably, only then could asexuals really start to crawl out of that hole.
Hmm. Absolutely. And, we'll get into this in the next question, but, asexuality, for many, many reasons, is often, invisible in many ways. And we'll come back to that in a moment. But I would like to just briefly ask, were there any sort of resources or communities that were helpful for you coming to better understand the language around asexuality and your identity?
Well, again, this comes into more, my more recent year because God, I graduated. How has it already been like almost like I'm still pretty young, so like it's only been about 4 years for me, but it still feels like a long time since I graduated.
Mm-hmm.
But it's only been in the past like two, maybe three. I want to say more 2 years where I actually met. Like I met. I'm sure you're probably familiar with Sen Senari, who actually introduced. Basically, it was kind of them who helped me understand better, and then I met other A-spec people, and I was like, "Holy crap, I'm not alone." It helped me not to
Mm-hmm.
just understand aces better, but sexualities and that kind of thing in general.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I certainly didn't have the luxury of Ace Tumblr growing up because for me, this is the 20-year reunion from when I graduated high school to give folks an idea of how old I feel now.
Oh, yeah, it's like I joke about like I feel old all the time, but I can't imagine how a lot of people feel just seeing their favorite stuff like turn 10 or 20 years old.
Yeah, and Duke can certainly relate to, many of your experiences being apothesexual. For Duke though, it's sex averse, not sex repulsed.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's part of it too. A lot of people seem to just think like, oh, asexual just means you don't want to have sex
No.
or you're not willing to have sex. No, some asexuals, I a big part of that is like some people might not want to, but they're willing to for their
Mm-hmm.
partner to give
Mm-hmm.
them joy, or
Absolutely.
they might just be like, we can have sex, we cannot have sex. I don't care.
Exactly. There's a real spectrum and diversity of experiences that fall under the ACE umbrella, and unfortunately, there's a lot of misunderstandings that have come about because of the lack of representation in media, in society, that lead to this misunderstanding that all aces are sex repulsed, sex negative, don't want anything to do with sex, and all wear like 50 long foot skirts. And that is not at
Yeah.
all what asexuality is.
Yeah, it's like I've even tried to like incorporate that, with a couple of my, actual other OCs. Like for one, just does it just like one of them just doesn't care about sex at all. Like they're just like, I don't care. They're
Yep.
not repulsed to it. They just don't care. And another one is they're just like they only see it as a means of reproducing. Otherwise,
Mm-hmm.
they don't care.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. All valid experiences.
Yeah.
So we'll kind of, build on this and talk a little bit about, why asexuality. And I will also argue aromanticism as well in many cases
Yes,
is,
because that one's a little bit harder for me to talk about as that's not my
yeah,
personal
I
experience.
won't expect you to. I'm just saying in general, I see it as also being invisible in many ways, but we'll
It
focus
it
on asexuality since that's your lived
yeah,
experience.
yeah,
So this concept or notion that asexuality is, an invisible orientation was a phrase coined by Julia Sandra Decker in 2014. And it kind of comes about for a variety of reasons, including the fact that there's just a lack of representation in media, in society, and erasure of aspec identities is unfortunately so very common. And it's almost impossible in most communities to find aspec focused groups and organizations.
Yeah, that that just and it's like it's so funny how that something in 2014 holds up still so well today.
Mm-hmm. We're over 10 years from that now. And we still face so many of the same issues that we were facing over 10 years ago when Julia Sandra Decker coined that term.
Yeah.
How do you, why do you feel that is such a common experience
I
for
I
aces?
so I think part of that is so there's a couple reasons. The big thing is, not wanting to have sex or, not caring. I think a lot of people do see that as boring. There's not a lot of room to like take it. A lot of people think that way, but it's like there's a lot of more ways to take it than you would think. Again, there's definitely not as many as if someone, was willing to have romance or willing to have sex. There's not as many, but there's still many more ways to do it. Or as I kind of quickly brought up in the call before we started, is that like sometimes characters are a lot of times there are characters that are technically aromantic asexuals, but that's not the focus of the character.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And the representation is very one-dimensional. It's very flat, and as you said, in many cases, it's not the focus of the character. And then on the other side of the coin, I can, refer to characters like Jughead, where they're very one dimensional. That is their only aspect of their character, and there's no development beyond that, unfortunately. And media representation of asexuality, I'll talk about this briefly, is often limited to, white settler or European, white European experiences, and
Yeah,
there is no visible representation for the most part of any other ace identity.
yeah,
And so it's so incredibly, understandable that if you don't fit that very narrow window of experiences that have, kind of been represented in society, it's so very hard to find the terminology, to find your identity in society.
yeah. Or and no, this is an issue that I don't think is entirely on some media or some games. It's like sometimes you already have to know your identity
Mm-hmm.
to find that representation, which
Mm-hmm.
I don't think is for places that are putting that in. That's not. I'm gonna say if it is their fault, it's not entirely their fault or
No,
barely their fault at all.
it's a multifaceted issue that makes it so very difficult.
Yeah. Where it's like the places that are trying to include it, that are trying to be thoughtful, are just kind of drowned out a bit for people who just don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Or for people who aren't that orientation, they're not going to be as likely to see that.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. I am so blessed where I am in having not only one Ace and Arrow organization, group that I help run myself, but also I've got connections in Toronto with a couple of different ASPEC organizations, as well as in Vancouver, back where I'm from originally. So I'm incredibly blessed, but I know for many, many people, I see it talked about in Lynn Saga's videos, in the comments all the time, just how few ASPEC focused organizations there are actually out there in the world.
Yeah, because I really haven't heard about any of these organizations. Like I just got lucky to find people who were similar to me. Like that's kind of just how it kind of happened.
Yeah.
And
So,
that was over the internet. Imagine
mhm,
like even 10, 20 years ago. Like the chances of you like a fellow ace finding another ace would be like near impossible.
exactly. I half joke, but I am also serious when I'm saying this. How does one spot an ace in the wild? It's not easy.
Yes, definitely not.
So Avon, I believe, does have does point to, do they? I know I know that Aurea, which is the aromantic equivalent of Avon, does have a list of ASPEC organizations on its website. But Avon, the website, I'm just looking at it right now, doesn't. Maybe under forums. I'm going to take a look. Do the forums list? Uh, community link forum. So community link forum lists ACE and Arrow organizations, well, ACE focused, um, not officially affiliated with Avon. There is a thread, but it doesn't look like it's been updated in a long time, unfortunately.
Oh yeah. That just reminds me, you need to go get some ace pins. That reminds me, I actually need to put where did I even put that? I had that on my desk, but I actually got it might have fallen off. I don't know what I did with the thing, but I got on Etsy, I actually got like an ace keychain for like Splatoon and like as an Octoling like that. Like I think that's one of the few ways you could find someone is if they openly have it out, which I assume I assume most ace people are probably pretty open about it, considering how open you have to be about it
Yeah,
sometimes.
absolutely. It's the only way, to either put an ace flag or an ace pin or something, ace spec on your backpack. So this Aurea, the aromantic equivalent of Avon, does list a number of A-spec groups, and most of the groups listed are both for aces and arrows, so it's inclusive of both. So I'm going to pop this into the chat here. You go to aromanticism.org/in-person communities. It does list some of the groups around the world which have ace and arrow groups, but there's not
Yeah,
many listed.
yeah.
Yo, Duke, thank you so much for gifting a sub to XanderVs. Way too
Wow,
kind.
Pogs, thank you. Pog. We you just kind of is there, I think I have a Pog somewhere. If I don't, it's fine. But I can at least put the I think they're called gyros. I don't remember what they're called.
Yeah, yeah, you can use the gyro. So on Oria's website, there's only 11 A-spec organizations that have been added to the directory across the US. Only 11 across the entirety of the US. Now, these have to be added, I understand, by groups, and not everybody's going to be aware of the existence of these organizations necessarily, and somebody's got to put the effort in and reach out to Oria and say, hey, add us to the directory. So I understand that, but it does still, it
Yeah.
still hammers home the point that it is very hard to find in-person groups.
Yeah, like I could probably even do a quick Google search and maybe find something, but I don't I don't know, how easy that would be, especially with all the AI nonsense like
Mm-hmm.
Google just starts piling now.
Oh, what you have to do is you have to type in your search term and then type dash no AI with no
Yeah,
space
that's what
before
I've been doing. That especially when I image search, uh that I do that so I don't find anything AI.
it. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, you just get spammed with AI stuff. It's so frustrating. And in Canada, there's only 6 of these organizations listed across the entirety of Canada. So it just shows how few in-person organizations are. They got some school-affiliated ones as well, but there's not many, and so it's difficult to find them, fortunately.
Yeah.
And because of that, it's hard to find community. There's a lot more online stuff, but you got to know where to find them in the first place.
Indeed.
So what happened for me is I found Avon initially, briefly went on their forums, realized these forums are like half dead at this point. And then I found a group, a Discord server, which was really instrumental for me to figure out my own identity, and that was the Aces in STEM Discord, which I joined. We've actually had a couple of folks from that server appear on the podcast over time. But
Yeah.
that group really helped me better, understand asexuality and aromanticism, and gave me an opportunity to talk to others about their lived experiences. So it was through that that I really started to say, hey, wait a minute, that's me in many cases, or I can relate to a lot of these lived experiences. And then from
Yeah, and
there,
I think that's part of it too. Like you might know your ace, but you might not know your exact
yeah.
uh you know, I don't know what the correct word for this. I'll just say type because I'm not sure what else to say. Like I learned that I was like I might not be a romantic, but I've learned like, oh hey, I'm demi-romantic, which means I
Mm-hmm.
want to get to know someone first
Mm-hmm.
before I just hop into the train.
Yeah, absolutely. And so demi romanticism does fall under the arrow umbrella.
Yeah.
At one point, I thought I might have been demi romantic, but I've realized no, the one relationship I did attempt to be in, I realized I never really had that romantic attraction. What I thought was really just, oh, I want to be, good friends with them. And the whole aspect of romanticism really made me uncomfortable. Welcome on in, BSW. Good to see you.
Yeah,
Let me
welcome
give you
in.
a shout out here. I had the opportunity to meet BSW at a meetup last summer, and it was so lovely to get to know her.
Yeah.
Bloodstained Wings creates some absolutely stunning dresses and does a lot of her own sewing. Um, Also plays some RPGs as well. No worries. I thought I'd just take the opportunity to say hello. No apologies necessary. I did it on my own.
I listen, derailing conversations by accident is my forte, so do not feel bad.
No, don't feel bad at all. I'm Happy to give you a shout out. We chatted a lot about, just how difficult it is to find community. And, why it
Yeah,
took so long for me to find community.
yeah.
What are some of
And
the most frustrating misconceptions around asexuality that you've
so,
experienced?
so one of the biggest things I actually like wanted to bring up for a long time is society actually values the things under the aromantic and asexual umbrella, because what society likes to value is getting to know someone before you have sex or date them. That is what society wants from you. They act like, oh, that's just straight. That's under the asexual umbrella. And to me, that is just insane how that has actually been hidden for most of us for a very long time.
So yeah, definitely some aspects of that, those experiences do, seem to be valued by society, though the specific part around, not experiencing attraction until you've developed that close emotional bond obviously is not part of the allo experience. But,
Yeah.
and I think it's I've talked about this book quite a bit in previous episodes of the podcast. Refusing Compulsory Sexuality, a Black Asexual Lens on Our Sect Obsessed Culture by Sharonda J. Brown does a really good job at breaking down the the notions of compulsory sexuality and what it is that society is actually trying to do in
Yeah.
valuing, this, or some aspects of society valuing,
Yeah, and yeah,
celibacy
that's
before
another thing. Like,
marriage
I
and
don't.
all this. And that's
Yeah,
not
like I think.
asexuality.
Yeah, like I think that's part of it too. Like, not the entire thing is under that umbrella, but society definitely values parts of that umbrella, which to me is so weird. Why is it so hidden if society wants to take bits and pieces of it and put it, into those kinds of relationships?
And where that what Sharonda J. Brown argues is it's all about control. It's all about patriarchal control, controlling the relationship, unfortunately.
Yep, control and yet procreation.
Mm-hmm.
It's like we're a lot of times like this. I feel like a lot of times like I feel like we're having a lot of places are having enough kids. Some places aren't, but that's because of strict laws. But a lot of other places that don't have those laws, we're having enough kids for our species to continue.
DSW, you hit it right on the nose. You get married and then you make as many babies as possible under the, this notion of compulsory sexuality. Um,
Yeah.
it's, you know, I really enjoyed reading Sharonda J. Brown's book. It is not at all a light read. Yo, welcome on in, Warrior for Life 9761. How
Welcome
was the
in,
rest
Warrior.
of Paper Mario? Hope you're doing well.
Yeah, and then there's like another smaller thing with asexuality that I think a lot of people misunderstand. Is like is that people are like, oh, you have like like you have to, a lot of people think you have to be with another asexual partner, but that is not entirely true either.
No.
You just need someone who respects your
Mm-hmm.
choices and is willing to expect you. Like I said, like, oh, like, Sen, earlier helped me find out, like, oh, hey, like more asexual people, but they also have, their lovely partner, Jax, who is very respectful of
Mm-hmm.
their wishes. And he's literally said, I can make more out of a relationship than, just that. That's not the point of the
Yeah,
relationship for me.
absolutely. And I know quite a few ace folks in a relationship with an allosexual individual. And yeah, sure they have to, communication is really important, but for them, in some of the folks I've talked to, the allosexual partner is very understanding, as you said, like in Sen's case. Not always, but it's obviously it can work. You just need to communicate. And I've argued for a long time on the podcast that no matter what kind of relationship you're in, communication is
Communication.
so important.
And sometimes, like, it's kind of, hard for, people to communicate, especially since, I don't know how much truth holds to this, but I apparently found out, like, that, apparently there's some kind of correlation between autism and asexuality, which, oh, hey, look, that is me. Like, I don't know. I don't know how much of a correlation that is, but that's also another thing that I think drives some of the representation that does get shown in media.
It doesn't work for everyone. It definitely doesn't.
Yeah.
But I do know several ace folks who are in relationships with allosexual individuals. But of course, yeah, it's not going to work for everyone. And for those folks, they've had to make a lot of, you know, they've really had to work and figure out, what works for them, what's the right balance.
Yeah. Yeah, and also, yeah, mad respect for the person and their lack of sex drive. Yeah, that's basically just me. I have no drive. Like, that's the I think that's part of it too. Like, I'm sex repulsed, but I also learned that I have no drive. Like, I literally have zero of that.
Mm-hmm. And so that would definitely be, you know, difficult, I would say, for somebody that is allosexual and, potentially, on the other end of the libido. Um,
Yeah.
that would be, a difficult relationship to be in. However, I do know folks that are in relationship with allosexual folks that they've worked and, developed a very happy relationship, but it's not for everyone, absolutely.
Yeah, it's not for everyone. It's just gotta you just gotta communicate and see what works. And
Hmm. And
sometimes a lot of times it doesn't.
I will pop the video for relationship anarchy in here, as well as a little bit more information about what relationship anarchy is, because we've talked about this many times on the podcast. Um, you know, how aspects of this can be a really useful tool in coming to understand what it is you're looking for from a relationship a little bit better. Even if you don't abide by all of the principles of anti-hierarchical relationship philosophies, I think there's many things in here that no matter what kind of relationship that you're in are useful. Big part of that is communication.
Yep, and a lot of times that is, especially for me, who is on the autistic end, who is terrible at communication.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes, and I think that's part of it too. Sometimes you have to learn to read, your partner's lack of communication too. And, sometimes that's hard. So it's just finding out what works best, for you and your partner.
Exactly. And I
Or
am
even,
also ADHD myself, and it's taken me many, many, many years to become more comfortable communicating. And it really
yeah,
wasn't until grad school that I developed a better idea of how to communicate, actually. I think it was
yeah,
just trial by fire where they're like, all right, you're going to present so much, you're going to have to, get used to presenting on a regular basis, being in social situations. And I think it basically just kind of helped me realize, okay, this is how I operate in society. But before
yeah.
then, it was really tough. Absolutely.
Yeah, and an even bigger thing with communication is like, I've been saying, partner or partner. Some people have multiple partners, and having multiple partners means a lot more communication. Which,
Certainly.
like it's not for me, but at the same time, it's like, and I don't understand it, but at the same time, it's like, if multiple partners works for you, go for it.
Yeah, absolutely. There's actually quite a large overlap between the aspec communities and the polyam communities. The Venn diagram that's pretty strong there.
Yeah. Honestly, I'm not that surprised. Like, especially, if, maybe, two people grow to like each other, but one person, can't, satisfy the other's needs. But if they're,
Exactly.
if both parties are okay with bringing a third or even fourth person,
Hmm.
like, to me, that makes a lot of sense. Like,
Absolutely. And are you familiar with astat advice or Cody Diagonal Orions at all?
no, sadly.
So they they make TikTok videos and also YouTube videos on asexuality, aromanticism, and then more recently talking about agender as well. But astat advice, aka Cody, is actually in a polyamorous relationship with a couple of their partners, and so they have, they had a primary partner originally, um, and because they're with an allosexual partner, a poly, relationship ended up forming because, it allows the allo partner to, fulfill their needs that, you know, Cody's not able to fulfill around, sex and those kinds of things.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's honestly, like, amazing like that. And a lot of people might think like, oh, like, especially, especially with what society values and having only one partner, like, might be like, oh, you're with multiple partners. Yeah, because I can't fully satisfy one, but
Hmm.
I'm okay, letting them satisfy themselves.
Absolutely. And I think also the reason, thank you again so much, Duke, for the gift sub to the Nintendo Gamer 24. Welcome on in, by the way. I
Very,
think one of
very
the
honored.
other big reasons for the overlap is that I think Ace and Arrow folks already have such a different perspective on what relationships can be. They're more willing to kind of think outside the box a little bit when it comes
Yeah.
to, the societal norms around relationships.
And not what it should be.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
the biggest thing of what it should be is what works for, everyone.
Exactly.
Not just like, oh hey, teehee society here, you're gonna be shunned if you don't do this. And meanwhile, me being here being like, good, shun me. It empowers me, you fool.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for many A-spec folks, just out of necessity, they've had to do really strong critical reflections on what it is they're looking for in a relationship. And as a result, many of the values that relationship anarchy and similar philosophies take often overlap with the values and ideals and, you know, philosophies that Ace and Arrow folks have around relationships, realizing, hey, it's not what society says should be important. It's about what it's important for those in the relationship. And that's what relationship anarchy argues.
Yeah, it's yeah, and it's like one of the biggest things like I've heard since I took like a gender studies class is like like getting married is doing the norm, and part of the reason that you're getting together in these different kinds of relationships is to go against the norm. So why make yourselves somewhat society accepted when you're never going to be fully accepted, and just do what works best.
Yeah. And so I think, as a result, many folks, not all, I know quite a few ACE folks that are in, what would be considered monogamous. It's not all aces, it's not all arrow folks, but there's quite a few ace and arrow folks that I know who are in relationship anarchy structures or poly relationships or something that
Yeah,
resembles those. So it's not all by any means, but there is a significant overlap between the two
yeah,
or three.
significant overlap. And the biggest thing I think that needs to be stressed here is that if going with what society says works best for you, or if that's what you want,
Exactly. Go for
go
it.
with it, but
Exactly.
don't feel forced either.
Exactly. Don't, if it works, go for it. If it doesn't, then don't feel forced. Exactly. And that's what, I've argued many times around, you know, for
And
me,
and that's one of the big yeah. And that's one of the biggest things like a lot of people like are like against my society, like, oh, they're like, don't do this. Absolutely don't do this. We want to fight against society. But at the same time it's like I want to fight against society, but what society wants sometimes works better for me.
and if it does, that's perfect. For me, what I would seek for if I was in a, you know, relationship of sorts, I would like the emotional closeness, but not the romantic aspects. And so, we talked about this in, a few episodes, but the notion of a queer platonic partnership, which kind of straddles that middle between, or that gray space between a purely platonic friendship that Western society would deem as platonic, and the typical romantic relationship that society or Western society would see. It kind of is somewhere in between those, and so queer platonic partnerships don't have any hard and fast rules. It's just that they don't fully resemble romantic relationships, and they don't fully resemble purely platonic relationships in the eyes of Western society. So generally, they have some aspects of emotional closeness. They maybe have other aspects, but something like that where there's a little bit more degree of emotional closeness, I could see myself being in. If it happens in the future, that would be okay with that. At the moment, I'm not seeking that. I'm perfectly happy being in these various communities that I've developed around me, though.
Yeah, it's like as I like to call it, I'm okay just sitting in the corner mostly, and if something comes my way, I'll go for it.
Yeah. So I would say that I'm the happiest I've been ever in my life when it comes to not feeling lonely, feeling like I've found community, feeling connections in this space that I've developed here locally through the support group, and making connections through the Ace and Arrow groups in Toronto, and then when I uh, go home to visit family in Vancouver, I'll reach out to the folks in some of the ace and arrow group there and usually meet up over the holidays and organize something. And that works
Yeah,
well for me.
yeah, and I think that's the biggest thing. Like, I'm not saying every, because some people are happy just living life with very, very minimal connections, but most people do want some kind of connection, and that doesn't always have to be romantic or sexual. It could just
Exactly.
be, I'm just sitting here.
Absolutely.
And it's like, I think one of the more like recent like things I saw with this is actually I actually kind of forgot about something I saw, but kind of a little more recently I actually saw an asexual aromantic creator come out about their experience. I'm sure you probably heard about it. She's fairly popular, Jane Animations. I saw that video and I was like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that kind of goes over a lot of good points
Mm-hmm.
that like it's just the baseline, but it still goes over a lot of good points that asexual and aromantic people are the people who are okay sitting in that corner and not feeling that relationship.
Absolutely. And I definitely have, a lot of people have, talked about Jaden Animation, coming out as Arrow Ace and, just it was interesting to see her come out at in that video, and I completely respect her saying this is all I'll say on it, but I am Arrow Ace.
Yeah, and that that's fine. And I think like she saw like that there wasn't a lot of places talking about it, and I think she felt like she had this experience and had to talk about it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And
And I think that's a big misconception is like people are like you're coming out like I think a lot of people don't understand like coming out fully like oh you're coming out as ace like is that even coming out and it's like yes that's coming out
yeah,
just because we're not gay or bi does not mean we don't have similar feelings or situations. It means we're comfortable coming out with our sexual and romantic orientation.
exactly. And I actually, it was interesting. Somebody put something, um, said something that really struck a chord with me was that to them, they don't come out, they let people in that, they let people in on their identity, but they only let the people in that they feel safe know about the identity. So for some folks, it's not so much about coming out as letting people in. And I thought that was a really interesting perspective and actually does make a lot of sense.
Yeah, and I think it also depends on the person. Like for me, I would say it's coming out. I don't
Mm-hmm.
care who knows that I'm ace. I think that's part of it too. Like some people might care and they might not want as many people to know, but other people might just be. I'm pretty much an open book. Feel free to read whatever you want. There might be like I don't know a few chapters blacked out, but other than that, I'm like, ask what you want.
Yeah, I've tried to be fairly open, obviously, on the podcast, about, my journey, about my experiences. I certainly don't talk about all the aspects of my life for obvious reasons, but absolutely, definitely
Yeah.
understandable.
Yeah, I do think that's actually a good, thing. Like some people, instead of coming out, they let some people in. I think that's an interesting take that should probably actually be spread around more.
Mm-hmm. It really struck a chord. I really, I definitely see that as, to some degree, my experience, especially with regards to, how I've handled it with certain folks in my family is, it's letting people in rather than coming out.
Yeah.
So we are about to hit a add in about 2 minutes or so here. Do you want to take a stretch break here for a couple minutes and then come back and chat about A-spec representation in video games? Do you want to continue?
Yeah. I think I could use a quick pee actually.
Perfect. Let's take a little bit of a break here, and we'll come back in about 5 minutes and chat
Yeah.
about A-spec representation in video games. See you
Yeah.
in a moment.
Yeah. See, and for you.
All right. Welcome back, folks. Hope
Indeed.
you had a good break. I excited to chat a little bit about A-spec representation in video games, and I saw that BSW mentioned Terra. That's actually a very good point. I hadn't thought about that. We can chat about
I
that.
don't know who that is, sadly.
It's a game.
Oh, Terra. Oh, Final Fantasy VI. I have not played a lot of Final Fantasy,
Oh,
so
I see what you mean. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, I have never
Yeah.
actually played Final Fantasy VI either, but I'll have to make a note about that and look it up. I am so
Yeah, I
sorry
don't.
for this ReadyBot spamming the Pride Guild raid train. I'm gonna have to shut that off.
Yeah,
Um,
sometimes bots like to go a little too ham on those.
I haven't even announced that I'm participating in that yet, so now you know. I will be
What do you
participating.
mean we both suck? I just didn't know.
I have never played a single Final Fantasy game in my
I
life. I'm
tried 7.
sorry.
I have tried to play the original Final Fantasy 7, but it legitimately hurt my eyes to look at. The
Uh,
backgrounds were too. I don't know how to describe it.
One of these days, I do want to try it, but or a Final Fantasy game. I just never have had the opportunity to play one.
Yeah, I know the original if your eyes can handle it, the original Final Fantasy is actually pretty readily available in most places,
Yeah,
I think.
I'll have to look that one up, and maybe once the once the very busy June schedule's over and I finish up the Pokemon playthrough I'm doing, maybe I can give that a try at some point.
Also, don't be sorry for spoiling an Ace
No,
character because
absolutely.
it would be probably hard to find a game with one anyways. So
Exactly. Yeah, we were about to talk about the fact that it is very hard to find A-spec representation in. Hey, welcome on in, Ghost. Good to see you. Ghost is the
oh
creator of the
yeah, the
Fruity
original
Stream
creator,
team, and also
indeed.
was on the podcast here back in 2024.
Yeah, on
Ghost.
Steam, the original Final Fantasy VII says it's like uh I know it's a little off topic, but it's like 12 if you wanted to try that.
Ghost plays a lot of Final Fantasy and RPGs herself. Good to see you, Ghost. Hope you've been able to unpack a little bit and get things organized. I know that you were very busy for a little while there with the move.
Yeah, me and my family are probably gonna move somewhat soon. We've been moving so much, it's like a pain. But I'm like, I don't got much choice right now.
Yeah, unfortunately, sometimes it's like that. I'm glad you got the PC unpacked. That's one of the most important things, of course.
Indeed.
So, what were you going to mention with regards to A-spec representation in video games?
So, though, I'm gonna bring up a couple. One I'm less sure of, and another I'm a lot more sure of. Uh, so the big one I want to bring up is Metaphor. I love that game so much, and part of the reason is romance isn't forced on you at all, or I guess technically MC. And MC displays a lot of it's either he's completely ignorant of the romantic approaches that are made on him, which is like maybe one, or he's just asexual or aromantic. Again, it can be really hard to tell
Mm-hmm.
sometimes. But for an Atlas game, it really felt that if they weren't pushing it, and if he's this oblivious, he's either extremely autistic or he is, you know, probably at least aromantic if someone is spelling their love out to him and he does not seem to care at all.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the difficulties in, interpreting, characters' orientation is could it be, that they are neurodivergent, or, is it
Yeah,
that
is
they
he?
are indeed aromantic or ace?
Yes. Although the bigger game I want to bring up is actually might be a surprise. It's either going to be complete surprise to most people, or people are going to be completely unsurprised. The other game I want to bring up is actually Baldur's Gate 3. Well, there are technically no characters that are technically ace. Part of ace representation is having people be, respect your orientation. And actually, probably one of the characters people least expect to respect that is actually Karlach. Because I saw originally, one of my friends streaming it, and they, decided to romance Karlach, and she's completely respectful to your boundaries. She's just like, I just want to be with you. If you don't want to have sex, I do not care. And to me, that is one of the biggest things I have seen for representation in a long time. Sometimes, again, a lot of times representation doesn't have to be someone being ace. We just don't want the romance or the sexuality forced on us. We want room for characters to either respect us or, for it to just not be forced on us. And I was really surprised that, they gave Karlach,
Mm-hmm.
that respect. And I
Absolutely.
was like,
That's really interesting, and I'm so glad to hear that. Absolutely, because normally the norm is that when you're, quote, romancing a character, it's implied that it's both romantic and sexual in nature.
yeah, and it's like she and and this is one of her words, not mine. She literally says, "I want to write write you till I see stars," but she's still respectful. So it's really like that. Really was like I already really liked Baldur's Gate 3, but that shot it up and like yes, I love this game even more now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's a really good point. I will have to read into that a little bit more and maybe perhaps play it at some point.
Yeah, it's a long game, so
Yeah.
I don't expect anyone to have to play that, but
Yeah.
yeah, I was quite pleasantly surprised that they put that in there, and I have heard that there are characters who will not go the relationship without that, and I think that's the biggest thing. A lot of people are like, oh, if we're having this representation, a lot of characters can't. No, it's just as important to have the bi, to have the gay, the lesbian,
Mm-hmm.
the
Mm-hmm.
straight relationships as it is to have the ace
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
aromantic relationships.
Absolutely. All the representation is what we inevitably need.
Yeah,
And a lot of it's lacking for so many things.
yeah.
Very good point. Absolutely. So, Coziest Fox actually brought up last episode Bomberman as possibly being Ace. Perhaps I've heard this actually mentioned from a couple people that Bomberman you know, the scene where Bomberman, I think it's happened in, which Bomberman was it? It's the, I think one of the newer ones, but you have a character that, you know, I have to look up which one it is, but
Yeah,
Fox
that
did a
that
really
hits
good,
on Bomberman, and Bomberman either completely ignores it or does not care.
exactly, or
Apparently,
just like runs away.
yeah,
So
and
yeah,
it's like part of it is like I think we brought this up earlier, but it's like there are characters I could point to in video games being like, oh my
could they
gosh,
be? Yeah,
they're they are no, they're guaranteed asexual and aromantic, but that's also not the point of the character either.
exactly.
Like
So,
that's part of the problem. Like I could point to Hollow Knight and say,
mhm.
oh my gosh, your main character does not care about sex. But that's not the point of the character at all. The whole
No,
point is for them to kind of be hollow and have literally no emotions.
exactly. And that's not the ideal representation we would like to see. Obviously, if we do see, you know, Ace and or Arrow characters, we would like to see more nuance to that, and you know, the fact that they're just
Yeah.
not, they're not one
Yeah.
dimensional.
And obviously it's not a game to really get into that kind of stuff either, so it's also like sometimes with the representation it's not representation and they're not trying to
Hmm.
put any kind of stereotypes on it either. That just kind of ends up with how the
Yeah,
character is.
exactly. And BSW brought up a really good point. Yeah, any character can be argued to be bi with that kind of reasoning.
You're like, oh my gosh, they're lesbians. They could also be bi.
Hmm.
Which I do think like there are like with some media I have watched. One of my pieces of media that I bring up a lot that I've watched is Madoka Magica, where there are a lot of lesbians, especially in the Majid record that got destroyed after like a couple of years. There are a lot of lesbians, and technically they could all be argued to be bi.
Hmm. But that representation isn't explicitly necessarily defined, or the nuance is not there.
Yeah.
And yeah, exactly. To actively show someone as a spec is more complicated than just not having a partner. Exactly. They may not have a partner for a whole host of reasons that may have nothing to do with them being ace or arrow.
Yeah.
They could just be single. It could, you know, be single for a whole host of reasons. And it doesn't necessarily mean they're ace, they just don't happen to be in a relationship. However, you know, I think because so many folks are desperate for ace and arrow representation, it's convenient to read those characters in as ace or arrow just so that we can at least have some idea, or, you know, say that there is something for us. But it's to be actually explicitly ace or arrow, you need more than that. Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's why I was like, I'm not sure if Metaphor Protag is Ace or not, but
Hmm.
they kind of displayed a lot of symptoms of, oh hey, they are not aware of it. And so it might just be like, or they're just ignoring it. So that's why I'm like, could just be oblivious, could be Ace. I don't know.
Absolutely. So yeah, I mean, video games even more difficult to come up with, you know, a spec representation than mainstream media somehow, but it's definitely difficult, especially when a lot of video games, you know, especially if they're Baldur's Gate, or if, you know, there are other games, the focus isn't necessarily
That, yeah. And
exactly.
that brings up a point I believe I brought it up earlier, maybe I didn't. I don't know. Is that sometimes you have to know your identity to find these things
Mm-hmm.
rather than it just be like, because if I wasn't Ace, I would probably just assume like, oh, Metaphor Pro Tag is just oblivious,
Mm-hmm.
or I would not, like my friend is Ace, and they were playing it, so. But here's the thing: if they weren't Ace and I wasn't watching, that stream, I might have not seen, Karlak being respectful. I might
Mm-hmm.
eventually, because, obviously Karlak, what I was like, if I'm gonna date anyone in Baldur's Gate 3, it's probably Karlak. So I might have found out eventually, but it would have been a while later.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And that's another completely separate part of the issue, where it's like it's already hard to find out if you're Ace or not, and then if you're not, you're probably not going to see these things, or if you
Exactly.
are, it might be even harder to just find out.
Absolutely. And then, we can always bring up the point that the representation is, it does, the intersectional representation is just not there in many cases.
It's really not a lot of times. Like, it's just like, even though, like, I know I keep bringing up metaphor, even though it's like, oh hey, Protag might be Ace, they're still pushing that straight relationship on it instead of it being possibly like, a a romantic or asexual relationship. And to me that's a little sad. Unlike, like, actually, like, another thing about Karlak is, she's bi, so, my friend is Ace, and, I is, you know they go with what they were assigned with at birth, female. But, so we have a lesbian Ace relationship, but that just happened to be by complete chance. So a lot of it's just like it's either complete chance or it's not there.
Exactly. And I had actually said intersectional relation or intersectional identities. So, for example, an ace character that is not white and cisgender, or an ace character that's, BIPOC, or that's, trans, but
Yeah,
intersex as well. Yeah, intersex representation is absolutely awful. No need to
yeah,
apologize. Very good
yeah.
point as well. Intersex representation is horrible.
Yeah. Like it's like it's all just it's like Ace is just the top of the iceberg. The lower you go in the iceberg, the worse it gets.
No need to apologize at all, BSW.
Yeah, no, it's
They sound very similar. Intersectional and intersex. Absolutely. No need to
they sound just
apologize.
yeah.
Do we want to
Yep.
talk at all about allonormativity and amanonormativity, or have we kind of fleshed that out enough here?
I guess those terms are actually relatively new to me, so I
No
don't.
worries. We can skip
Yeah,
that one.
yeah.
Do you want to talk about what ace pride means to you?
Uh, yeah, I think for me the biggest thing with Ace Pride doesn't always mean you have to shout it. A lot of people are like, shout it to the rooftops, yeah, and that's totally fine. But a lot of times, having pride just means being happy with who you are, and you don't have. If you don't feel comfortable shouting it to the rooftops, you don't have to. It's just about being happy with who you are. Like that. That's kind of what all pride is to me. It's like
Hmm.
you don't always have to shout it if you don't feel comfortable, or if you don't want to. If you don't have the energy to do it. To me, that's the biggest thing. Being
No,
proud of who
no.
you are. The biggest thing is being happy, with that part of yourself.
Exactly. That's what, you know, that's what pride is. It's, you know, being proud of your identity, being accepting of it. It doesn't have to be loud. You don't have to be loud and shout it from the rooftops and go to all the pride events and wear an ace flag for it to be pride. That's why I bring this
Yes.
question up, because I want to talk about the fact that Ace and Arrow Pride doesn't have to be you going and marching in the Toronto parade every year and wearing a ace flag. It can Ace Pride can exist in so many different ways, and that is why I ask this question.
Yeah, and especially with how much more and more time becomes a more and more valuable resource for everyone, making those events sometimes becomes near impossible.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. There's times it's not safe. This year especially.
Yep. And it's like, and sometimes it's like, we'll do what we do our best to be proud. And a good chunk of people, I would say most people are probably loud about it, but then again, we don't know about the people who are proud, but they're just really, really quiet. So we might not know. Most of the people might actually be the quiet, proud people.
Yeah, absolutely. I am, quite loud and open and an activist, but I'm also quite lucky that I can be out relatively, and I say relatively safely where I am. So I'm fortunate in that regard. But, and also I can take, I've got massive amounts of privilege being white,
Yeah,
passing as male. I can easily go out there and people will assume my identity as male.
yeah,
So
and
I've got a
that's a
massive
big
amount of
thing.
privilege there.
Yeah, that's a big thing for me too. Like I've learned that my identity is, I forgot the exact word. Oh, demi-masculine. That was it. That I learned my identity. Like I don't feel like a man, but I'm still comfortable. Having my body be the way it is.
Hmm. So I identify as non-binary. I don't. Well, it's not comfortable for me to use the he him is it feels wrong.
Yeah,
It doesn't feel
yeah,
right.
and that's me too. Like I prefer if people, I should have said that at the start of the stream. Don't know why I didn't. My brain is all over the place, but anyway, I do prefer if people are you know, do call me, by they them, but I'm also,
Yeah.
on the side of I'm not going to send the pitchforks and torches after you if
Yeah.
and that's another big thing. Like I think part of the reason people are, scared to learn and scared to ask people is because they think, oh, the people are scary and gonna bring out the pitchforks and torches when most of us are just like, if you're just genuinely curious,
Hmm.
we're happy to help and you
Absolutely.
know point you in the right direction rather than put the pitchforks and torches at you because that it's more helpful that we have more people to understand rather than pushing people away.
Exactly. 100%. So is there anything else that we missed that you'd like to bring up at this point?
I mean, honestly, I think we got to what I wanted to talk to
Perfect.
about and more because we actually got a lot of good stuff in today.
Definitely. I think we've covered everything I've wanted to, so I think at this point we can go on a raid. Let's